Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. Shortly, I will be joined by Dr. Orin Davis for a discussion about positive psychology, flow, creativity, and self-actualization. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits as well as high net worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Dr. Davis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's my pleasure. Please take a moment or two and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure. I'm a self-actualization engineer. I run the Quality of Life Laboratory, and I do work in HR consulting as well as research in those areas, doing work on flow, creativity, self-actualization, teamwork, and a number of other topics. I'm also a startup advisor, and I help startups to develop their hiring systems, some of their strategy, specializing primarily in HR tech, wellness, and ed tech.
So tell me, what is self-actualization?
So ask 20 people, get 20 answers. But what I would say is that self-actualization is primarily about the fulfillment of your potential. And it's basically an upward spiral, sort of like a virtuous cycle in which by fulfilling your potential, you create more potential that you fulfill and create more potential and so on. So it's really a great level of being where you get to actually expand yourself and do and be your best.
It almost sounds like it has something to do with the power of positive thinking.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I mean, positive thinking is definitely useful at the appropriate times, but positive thinking is not everything for that. And especially we do have negative experiences, negative emotions, negative thinking, and they're all very necessary. So we don't want to ignore those pieces.
Not at all. Now, also in the title is flow.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
Ask 20 people, get 20 answers. But so we're still developing our understanding of what flow is, but I would speak about it as the optimal experience. It is a situation where you are very highly focused. It is an experience where you're often performing at your best at something challenging, or certainly you're providing high levels of skill, your own personal skill level, to a difficult challenge, usually very focused. You feel like you're in control of the situation, not really worried about screwing it up or anything. And it's something that you're intrinsically motivated to be doing. So it's something that you like doing, that you're doing for the sake of doing it. So it's something that is beyond just being highly focused in an activity, which is where some people put it. And it's beyond, applying high levels of skill to a challenge. It also goes along with being intrinsically motivated to do it. You're doing what you want to do for its own sake.
So passion.
Passion is often related to flow, but things that we're intrinsically motivated to do, we may or may not be passionate about. And passion, I would argue, is actually one level higher. Also, passion is one of those neutral things that can actually go both ways. If you look at Bob Balaban's work on passion, you see that there's both harmonious passion, which is often very good for us, but then there's also obsessive passion, which can also be an interesting driver, but can have some downsides.
The title is positive psychology.
Mm-hmm.
What's negative psychology? Is there
Positive
such a thing?
psychology doesn't really stand in contrast to negative psychology. I mean, in a sense, like when you think of the opposite of the positive is actually nothing. And the opposite of the negative is actually also nothing. And so in a very real sense, the typical psychology, like when you think of the field of psychology, most people think of fixing problems. So you got issues, we fix them, but when we fix them, you're back at neutral. And what positive psychology is focusing on is how do we get from neutral to flourishing? Or even how do we get from negative past neutral up to flourishing? Because we don't just want people to be at their baseline levels or to be, problem free. Problem free is good, but that's not really great. We want to do more than that. And we want to be able to empower people to do their best, to be their best. But that's not, problem free. That's, now that you are unfettered from your problems, now how far can you go?
You're reminding me of a statistic that I remember reading some time ago, that the highest suicide rates are in Scandinavia because the government solves all the people's problems. That if the social security network, the safety network, is so, for lack of a better word, good, that people don't have to worry about anything. And if they don't have to worry about anything, apparently that they lose something and they don't feel like they are contributing not only to society, but to themselves, and they blow their brains out or jump off the roof.
I haven't seen that statistic, but it's certainly a reasonable line of thought that we do need to feel like we contribute. We also do need to feel like we're connected to people. So that's another thing. And I don't know so much about the Scandinavian region and how people connect with one another. But what I can certainly say is that we do need connection. We do need to feel like we can make a contribution to the world. And often some of the challenges that we experience are inspirations for us to make those contributions.
Well, to make a contribution, I would think that we'd have to be productive, creative, and have personal well-being.
I would say to make the maximal contribution we can. But, one of the things that we do find is that people, even in dire straits, actually can do a lot of contributing and actually do a lot of things. So it's the kind of thing where people certainly are capable of doing all sorts of things in all sorts of situations. But yes, to maximize your contribution, you're going to need, the well-being, you're going to need the creativity and so on.
How do we engineer? How do we create self-actualization?
So I would say that that's a really difficult problem and what I'm spending my life working on. I think, one of the main things that I've found is that self-knowledge is one of the most important details. And that a lot of people really haven't taken the time to get to know themselves and to know what they're about, what they like, what they don't like, what their value system is, and what their talents are, what their strengths are, and how they might be able to use those, in the world. Like what is their place, what is their role in the world? And as we're trying to figure that out, the first step is going to be that we should understand ourselves. That comes first. But often people don't do that. So as we take time to get to know ourselves, we understand ourselves, then we also go out and explore the world around us. We understand how we interact with the world and what the world does with and for us. And then we sort of notice certain holes or certain places where we can do more than the status quo currently has, or where we can give more than the status quo currently has. And we find that thing often aligns with our talents, our capabilities, our values. And when we find that sweet spot, that's really where we're actually self-actualizing, because we understand ourselves, we understand our potential, we understand, how we could fulfill it, and we understand how we can actually go beyond ourselves into what Maslow called self-transcendence, making a lasting contribution to the world so that it's different. The world is different and hopefully better for the fact of our having been in it.
The old leave the world better than when you found how you found it.
Definitely a good idea. After all, when we came into the world, it was already better than our ancestors found it. And that was kind of the point. It's that, we also have to acknowledge that history of like what people have done for us so that, we come into this world I came into a world with electricity and running water, particularly because a whole bunch of folks who came before me, wanted to leave the world better than they found it. So now it's my job to leave the world better than I found it. And that's just sort of a continuing obligation for the generations.
I'm just thinking, are we leaving the world better than we found it if we're leaving social media and an addiction to gadgets?
I would argue that we actually are, only because this fight and these battles with things like social media that we're going to have to happen sooner or later. And now they're happening.
So get it out of the way now.
Yes. So maybe, hopefully, and I can tell you, there's a whole lot of people, myself included, who are sort of thinking like, my kids are not going to know what some of these electronic devices are. My kids are not getting on social media. Like, I don't care. Not allowing it. And by the way, you find that many of the people who helped invent social media, their kids aren't on it either. And we've already seen the problems, and we're already doing the backlash. And there's already organizations that are working to fight this, and already people joining on that team. Things like All Tech is Human, Center for Humane Technology, a whole bunch of other organizations that are already fighting the fight. So hopefully, within a few generations, that war is going to be over, and we'll have social media that is a tool and not a master.
If I'm not mistaken, addiction to social media is now a recognized medical condition.
Haven't heard about that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I think when the stories came out about Facebook and knowing that it could be their site could be addicted to teenage girls, that some report had it that it was listed now as a mental health disorder.
Well, one thing I can say is that they hired psychologists to make it addictive. It's not addictive by default. They made it addictive on purpose, and they hired people, from the world of psychology to help make it addictive.
So that would mean there's an ethical problem in your profession.
That's not there are ethical problems in every profession.
Don't.
And yeah. So, but yes, and many of those people are, many of the people that were involved in creating the addictiveness of social media are having some real attacks of conscience. It's part of how the Center for Humane Technology started. Like, if you listen to Tristan Harris's story, like that's kind of what happened. He was working on some of these things. It's like, this is not good. And he started calling it out and saying, this is not good. What we're doing here, we're not making good things. We're making bad things.
I think it goes back. The best example would be Oppenheimer and Einstein.
Indeed. And once again, but it's also important to keep in mind that, these horrible things that we created, they came out of good things that we created.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very real sense, the atomic bomb is the weaponization of the equation E equals MC squared.
That's right.
So, I mean, we came up with this incredible understanding of the universe, and then we started using it to kill people.
Well, it goes back. My favorite story of irony is the Gatling gun. The Gatling gun was the first, for lack of a better word, submachine gun.
Mm-hmm.
The one that you would crank and the bullets would come out. If you've seen any Western, you've seen a Gatling gun. Gatling was a surgeon, and he was appalled by what he saw on the battlefield. So he thought that if he created a weapon that would kill as many soldiers as previously would have been required by 50 soldiers, there'd be 50 less or 49 less soldiers on the battlefield, so there'd be fewer deaths. Didn't work out that way. Let's try a more pleasant topic. My career counseling clients, almost to a person, I have to ask them, regardless of how many years experience they've had, regardless of their age, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the older, more experienced think for a second, because at first they're kind of insulted, and then they say, oh, that's a good question. And it is amazing how many people do not know what they want to be the next stage of their career.
Absolutely. Find that a lot.
Talk to us about that.
I think it goes back to the point about self-knowledge. You can't know who you want to be when you grow up if you don't know who you are and who's the you that's going to grow up. And I think that too many situations in the world prevent us from actually finding out. I think that, and I would almost call it like an epidemic lack of self-knowledge. We're not taking the opportunity to grow and to find out. And there's a whole lot of things that are going with that. Helicopter parenting being just one of them. Overprogrammed kids, overprogrammed schools. I mean, we're finding that students are not used to downtime. People and social media is a huge problem with this. People don't get the downtime anymore. And we've even developed this culture of busyness where we feel like we have to be busy. And of course, I don't have to explain that busyness is often a way to escape from things as well. And addiction, also a way of escaping from looking at ourselves, seeing the pluses, but also seeing the minuses, seeing that there are holes or gaps in our lives, seeing, for example, loneliness. And many of us have not had the opportunity to develop our experiences with solitude, which can be very beneficial to us. We haven't taken the time to find out where we're strong. And also, when you analyze your strengths, you discover the places where your strengths aren't quite working for you. And again, we call those weaknesses. But they're really more situations. They're often like flip sides of strengths, or places where your strengths aren't working so well for you. You often, when we're so busy, we don't have time to explore, like, what do we value? What is our value system? What are we about? And it's a funny thing, but I opened my management class. I teach Management 101. I actually opened with the question, why are people assholes? And what we eventually come to is people are assholes because they don't have time. It's actually a time deficit more than anything else. It's not that people are bad people. It's that most of the time, they don't have time to be good people. And that's why they're not being good people. Or they've got some kind of crunch or some kind of pressure. And part of that is we're seeing more of that because we're not able to take that time to find out what we value. And when we run into a conflict of values, we haven't thought about what our value system is. We haven't really rank ordered our values. And so we're not sure which ones to choose when we have to make a choice or, between our values. We don't necessarily know to say, I'd rather do this one than that one. And it takes thought. And that leads to us making sometimes bad choices that we even don't agree with ourselves. But that also requires a lot of personal reckoning that's very hard for us. But each of these things gives us two things. One, self-knowledge. Two, it gives us maturity. And when we haven't gone through those things, we haven't grown up. And we also don't know what we want to do with our lives because we're not sure how we want to perform our values in action and in work and in life. If we haven't taken the time to get to know ourselves, our value systems, what our aspect of culture is, what kind of culture we believe in, what kinds of things we're good at, what kinds of things we might be good at but don't like, what kinds of things we want to be good at, and what kinds of things we're not good at and we don't care. And can we actually just say to the world, not good at it, don't care?
Yeah.
Which,
But
by the way, is an important one.
what if you say you're not good at it, but you wish you were? For example, I would like to be good at physics. I've always been fascinated by it, but I ain't no physicist.
So what?
So I say I don't know, I don't understand. I ask questions. Usually the answer I get doesn't help me, and I just move on. But it's not, so what? Okay, I don't need to be a physicist to do my work, but I do need to know how you learn a subject that you're not familiar with, that you're not good at, so that you can excel at your work. Because people come to me and they say, I need a promotion. So, okay, what will it take? Well, I've got to learn this software and that software. Well, have you done any online courses? No. Or somebody comes to me with a resume and during the pandemic, they've got nothing. I say, okay, you were unemployed, but what did you do during those 2 years? Year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was. And they say, nothing. You didn't learn anything? You didn't take any online courses? You didn't take advantage of the time off? Answer's no. So I asked them, what message do you think that'll send to a potential employer? And they go, I never thought about that. So that goes back to your self-actualization.
It also, for your question, it takes time. And one of the value trade-offs that we often have to think about is we have a finite amount of time and consequently a finite amount of money and energy, and how our value system sort of helps us understand how we're going to spend it. And even, with social media, our attentional systems. I mean, think about it. We pay attention. That's the cost of social media, is that we have to pay attention to it. We don't pay money. We just pay attention and we pay time. But time is money, as we say in business. So social media is not free. And we know that, we don't think about it that way. But when we're paying time, we're paying money. We're paying attention, we're paying money. But it's the same thing when we need to learn something. We need to pay time. We need to pay attention. If you want to learn something, it's a matter more than anything else of blocking the time. You want to be good at physics? Fantastic. Then block the time and put in the time. And you may also need to get a teacher or a tutor or somebody who really understands the physics and knows how to explain it in plain English. Many, many experts are very good at what they do, but they don't know how to explain it in plain English.
That's my definition of a genius.
And so some of that, and some people are trained to do it in plain English, some are not. It happens that part of my doctoral training and even undergraduate, a lot of my professors were very emphatic about that fact. If you can't explain it in plain English, you can't explain it.
Yeah.
And
when I was doing a search for a disease researcher, and all the candidates were PhDs, and I would ask them to explain their doctorate to me. And it didn't matter if they had concluded their doctorate a couple years prior or a couple decades prior. No one forgets their doctorate.
True.
And there were those who couldn't do it. They simply could not explain it to me. And if they couldn't explain it to me, that meant that they couldn't explain the disease, which is Parkinson's disease, to the general public. And that would be a problem because that was part of the job description. And now I've forgotten what I wanted to ask you, but it'll come to me. Eventually it'll come to me. When you have a situation where you are trying to improve yourself and you don't know exactly how to do it, and you're embarrassed to ask for help, how do you advise people to overcome it?
So I think the first question would be, why are they embarrassed to ask? And
Sign of weakness.
I'm sorry?
Sign of weakness.
Sign of weakness.
They think that if they ask for help, it's a sign of weakness. I believe that asking for help is a sign of strength. And that's what I explained to them. But they believe that it's a sign of weakness, so they don't want to ask for help. Plus the fact they're afraid that they're going to fail, and the person will get back to them. Well, how are your physics lessons going? And you say, I gave up.
So for all those things, one of the things you might want to ask is, which is worse? The embarrassment of asking for help or the embarrassment of being incompetent in the area in which you want to be competent? And I would argue that, in that situation, you might just want to frame it as pick the lesser of two evils. And if the embarrassment is the greater of the two evils, then that tells you something.
I have run out of questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up and share your contact information. And I'm going to ask you my last question. Is there anything I have not asked you that you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
Interesting question. I mean, we only have half an hour, so there's only so much we can cover in half an hour. But I think that
You got 7 minutes.
there you go, there you go. So I think probably what I would talk about with you then would be, more about how we get to know ourselves, and also how we turn that into the confidence to make the difference, to go out and ask for help and do those things. And part of it is, I would say that the answer to that question is, first of all, understanding ourselves sometimes at the most basic levels, preferences, things we like, things we enjoy, and what that teaches us about ourselves, which skills we like using, which skills we really have, what do people tell us we're really good at, like just doing that assessment of ourselves. And one example might be what's called the reflected best self exercise, which is in brief, where you go out and ask people, what am I like at my best? And the answers that come back are often incredible, but they also are sometimes surprising.
Yes.
And like sifting through those surprises. But then, as we figure out who we are, we can also discover who we want to be. And then some of that just comes down to, well, do we want to be that person? And if we do, what kind of time, effort, and energy do we want to put into it? And some of that energy is getting help. Nobody does things on their own, in a very real sense. And if you want one of the best examples of that, open up your refrigerator. Because I'm pretty sure that almost all of your listeners did not start this morning by milking the cow. So if you got milk in your fridge, you asked for help. If you have orange juice in your fridge, you asked for help. If you've got a steak in your fridge or your freezer, you asked for help. And funnily enough, you paid for that help. And probably at some point, today, yesterday, last week, last month, you gave help to somebody else. And if you're the kind of person who might be afraid of asking for help, you're probably also the kind of person that does a lot of helping of other people. And if you did, what's wrong with getting as good as you've given? Often we're much more concerned with people who don't give as good as they got. Well, how about the people that can maybe try getting as good as you've given, or at least a little bit of what you've given?
What's QL Lab?
So that's my laboratory, and it's the Quality of Life Laboratory. It's actually named after my doctoral advisor's lab, which was the Quality of Life Research Center. So sort of my hat tip to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Jay Nakamura, who are my doctoral advisors. But what we're doing is work on self-actualization. And one of the things that we're looking at is what is the algorithm for self-actualization, so to speak. It's a huge project. I will spend my life on it. I will see how far I get, and hopefully at bare minimum, I'll make some progress on it. And we do research on creativity, on flow, on teamwork, on self-actualization. And we also have an applied branch, which is my HR consulting practice, where I'm making workplaces great places to work. And in a very real sense, work is a key part of our self-actualization process. So that's one of the reasons why I'm both studying it and practicing it. So we're launching new studies all the time, and often they're coinciding with the consulting that we're doing to help companies with performance management, hiring systems, training and development, diversity, equity, inclusion, all sorts of things like that.
Well, Dr. Davis, I thank you profusely for coming on. This has been very interesting, and I could say even in a sense, inspirational. So I thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And I want to thank everyone for watching. I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Please, as always, stay focused on success.